Hi, everyone, and thank you for attending today's webinar. Should you break up with your recruitment marketing agency? 5 signs it's time to part ways. Our hashtag for today will be #recruitingtech. We'll be live tweeting throughout the webinar and invite you to join the conversation as well. If you experience any technical difficulties during the presentation, please contact ReadyTalk support at 800-843-9166. Don't worry about writing that down. I will be typing that number into the chat window for your reference. After the event, we'll be following up via email to share the recording and slide deck for your reference. Our speaker today is Matt Charney, Executive Editor and Head of Content at Recruiting Daily. Matt brings a wealth of industry insight to the topic of recruiting technology, thanks not only to his beat at Recruiting Daily, covering HR technology and recruiting trends, but also due to his experience as an advisor for companies such as Hiring Solve, TextRecruit, and Clinch. He currently holds HR fellowships at Universum Global and Adobe. You can find him on Twitter at Matt Charney. Without further ado.
Thank you. Oh, I screwed up my cue there. This is like the Oscars. Yeah. All right. Cool. Thank you very much, everyone, for joining today. We're going to be talking about what is apparently a really hot topic, which I had no idea, and that is whether or not it is time to maybe consider other options than a traditional recruitment marketing agency. I didn't know it was a hot topic until I posted a preview for this webinar and received a flurry of comments telling me that I was an idiot and that agencies were amazing and that I basically am an embittered person who has an agenda. The part about being an embittered person with an agenda is true, although it's got nothing to do with this. But I do want to just go ahead and start off by saying this. When we're talking about breaking up with recruitment market agencies, if the answer should you, or the question is should you, I would say the answer is it depends. And I also want to say that, if I offend anyone on this call, which is an inevitability, given the fact I can see the attendees and know many of you work for some of the fine agencies, I'm, one, for sure not talking about your product or company, and two, if a breakup has to happen, it's nothing personal. Sometimes things just don't work out, and you all are great people, all right? I just want you to know that I love you. So with that, I only have 30 minutes, so we'll try to make this quick. But I do want to kind of start off by telling you a story, and that is my first experience as an agency client. I was hired by a Fortune 50 company to help with their employer branding and social recruiting efforts, although neither were called that back in the days when I was going to high school with dinosaurs. All that is to say, I did all of the meetings with the agency, and they pitched some really awesome ideas. We're talking like Don Draper awesome ideas, like some of the most creative things you've ever seen with storyboards, which is just like intense. And mind you, I had no idea at the time why we were storyboarding a Facebook page, but I figured that was what you did. This was went on for several weeks. We were passing around, banding around ideas. And finally, the big day of the deliverable at the end of this project came, and I realized that we had paid $125,000 for somebody to set up a Facebook page for us. All of those creative ideas were delivered into a packet with some market research at the end, and I go, cool. I need to get into that business because I think I can make a Facebook page. So that was kind of my first experience with that. What the value was, I wasn't able to see, and frankly, still probably don't know what it is. But more or less, that's kind of the perspective I'm coming from, is that oftentimes what's promised and what's delivered are very different in an agency setting. And the reason is this. Agencies obviously want to try to get as much of your business as possible. The reason why, I'm sure you've heard the term agency of record, every agency who's bidding for your business wants that agency of record title is so they can get the recurring revenue of being able to buy your media for an entire year. There have been a lot of changes, though, certainly, to the power structure. And I think, as you'll see during this webinar, that the companies are sort of taking back a lot of the traditional roles, responsibilities of agencies. That's a trend that has nothing to do with recruiting. In fact, you're really starting to see that on the consumer side, as we'll see in a second. And I do think that in as much as we love talking about recruitment being marketing, we're going to start seeing a similar trend. So all of this is borne out by statistical evidence. And I do want to start off by talking a little bit about some numbers. Now, the theme of this is data, so none of these numbers, could actually be accurate. I could have made them up in their sources, and you would have no idea whatsoever. This is sort of like your quarterly agency report. So, I have the source and the numbers, but not the context. Let me try here. So basically, it's a good time to be in marketing. Companies are investing heavily because times are good. And in fact, in the next year, big old survey that was done by Constellation actually said that there is going to be a 24% overall increase in spend, which is good, right? Like, that's a quarter more money than last year. That means a lot of account execs with PR degrees getting hired into AE roles. Okay, so couple that, though, with the fact that recruiting is not going to be getting most of that money. In fact, there's only going to be a 5%, which is more or less flat when you factor everything in, year-over-year increase projected when it comes to specifically spending recruitment marketing. So essentially, what you're looking at is having the budget, the cash flow, and the approvals to basically do most online marketing and media buying activities, which are largely determined by having the ability to bid at a competitive rate for things like AdWords and make budgets for media placements, things like that. That's actually not moving towards recruiting. It's moving towards the marketing function, and that's a big part of what agencies do today. So that's something to consider, is that the competency is actually being moved out of the function. Second off, that's going to be compounded by the fact that 32% of employers this year plan to hire more recruiters, but even more than that, 48% plan to increase hiring. So essentially what you're seeing is a flat increase. That doesn't exist. I made that term up. What you're essentially seeing is the year over year is going to be flat in terms of the amount of money you get to spend on recruitment marketing, and you're going to have more recruiters trying to fill positions, but you're going to have more roles as well. So essentially, trend-wise, what we're seeing is the decrease in emphasis on sort of the front of the funnel activities and more on the operational and back-end activities, at least from a spend perspective. So looking at a consumer set, again, if recruiting is marketing and we're supposed to be aligned to the business, I think it's really interesting. This is a poll that good old friends at HubSpot did with a bunch of CMOs for about 5,000 businesses. They asked, what are your company's top marketing challenges? And they align really closely, I think, with a lot of the data that we're seeing in talent acquisition and HR. Top of that, obviously, is generating traffic and qualified leads. How do you build that funnel, right? And so that is obviously a huge area of focus. But number two, I think, fair spending, proving the ROI of our marketing activities. Now, mind you that these are chief marketing officers of organizations. This is not the guy who's the head of the employer brand. So you have 43%, so 2 in 5, who are supposedly experts in this in-house, have no idea, apparently, how they're getting any ROI out of any of their spend, much less their agency spend. So nobody really has this figured out. But I think what's interesting is from a marketing perspective, when you look at their counterparts, I'm sure if I asked CHROs this, you'd get a totally different data set. But marketing doesn't think that hiring talent's particularly all that hard, and it's certainly not an emphasis of spend. In fact, 17%, which is second lowest to finding an executive sponsor, whatever that means, said that the recruitment marketing was their primary challenge. So, again, I see that the role of marketing and the function recruitment is shifting along with these trend patterns, particularly if you have to work with your marketing counterparts. They'll go, finding top talent, good luck. Try proving ROI, which, by the way, you're going to have to do. So how are companies planning on doing this? Well, it's a lot of stuff that actually happens after the initial point in the funnel, right? So obviously the marketing, much like recruiting, you have a very distinct handoff between demand generation, lead gen, and lead nurturing, candidate development and recruiting, and ultimately the end goal conversion, or what marketers will call moving somebody from an MQL or marketing qualified lead, SQL, to a sales qualified lead. The thing is, once somebody is in your database, for the most part, unless you are, paying on a per campaign basis largely for specific, emails or other collateral to be created, almost all agency activity is actually happening at the front of the funnel, right? It's casting, a net in a targeted way to try to bring in a certain demographic or segment of candidates. And agencies are great at that, right? Which is why, to a large extent, through their efforts, we're getting still on average with 4.3% unemployment, somewhere around 200 resumes, of which you know how many are qualified, into our database for every position. So, in fact, I would say that most recruiters are not largely suffering from a dearth of options. It's a dearth of qualified options. But with that said, they're sitting on a huge amount of leads that have more or less gone cold. So really the question now has really shifted from, can we get people in the funnel? The answer is yes. And media buying, systematic programming, PPC, everything else has proven that fact. The challenge, as anyone can tell you, is getting that candidate to email you back. And so really what we're seeing in both consumer marketing and recruiting is a shift really towards converting already acquired leads as opposed to just simply acquiring them. So we're really moving from that volume metric, which is complete vanity, although agencies absolutely love them, really into a bottom line business metric, which is conversion. Growing website to traffic obviously is going to be a huge concern across the board. That's spend that you're probably not going to have as that becomes increasingly more competitive. And then increasing revenue derived from existing customers. About half of all marketing firms are doing that. What's the recruiting equivalent of that? It's internal mobility and referrals. So, again, certainly I think that there's a lot of focus and business alignment. The thing is that their agency of record and your agency of record are going to be different. And with all due respect, guess which one is going to have the more power in both deals, as well as purchasing parity and the better creative staff. It's not the people on the recruitment marketing side. Hate to tell you that on the phone. We love this job, but come on, we're not working to do Coke's next media campaign. So let's take a look of that number kind of stacked against how, and this is Hunt Scanlon, by the way. If you're not familiar with their work, they only do reports on recruitment advertising. It's a very niche market. Budget breakdowns do not, in talent acquisition today, support either lead nurturing, candidate development, or referrals and lead qualification. Essentially, you are having a very outside spend still on activities that are designed simply to get more people into the database that you aren't utilizing or messaging to correctly, right? So you have 30% of all recruiting funds are being spent on job boards and advertising. A whopping 22%. So think about that, like a fifth of your budget, a quarter of your budget. See, that's agency math, my friends. So 22% are actually going to recruitment agency costs. And actually, in this case, we're not talking third-party agencies. We're talking, the agency's quote of record. So that's a significant amount of money that could be spent. But next to that is the fact that this is shocking to me. We spend less on technology for all we make of it than we do on old school agencies as a rule, right? And then chalking up right next is employee referral program, your number one source of hire. Then we add an 8% of employer branding. So essentially, when you look at all of these, only 17% of the average recruiting budget is actually going towards the technologies that are going to enable the other 80% of activities, which seems like a huge disconnect to me. A large reason for that, again, is that 22% of the agency pie, and likely, most of that 8% of the employer branding pie. That is because this spend is largely being determined by the recruiting agencies who are driving both the analytics and the reporting. So taking a look at kind of where the market possibility is and kind of what the stakes are, 2017, $11.4 billion is going to be spent on recruitment advertising. So that's a pretty good chunk of change. That's the GNP of the nation of Ghana, by the way. So that's a lot of money, right? And so that is only a fraction of $48 billion we're going to spend on recruiting. But if you think about kind of just it's a pretty big percentage that we're only spending on acquiring candidates front of funnel through basically temporal ads and campaigns that are only good for so long, right? So I think this is an interesting report. This is Gallup's annual hiring survey. Top challenges that your team is facing, and this is actually was asked of CMOs and CEOs. This is not asked recruiters. They say that the biggest tension that their actual team is facing is a competition for talent. So marketers are actually feeling that they don't have enough capabilities in-house, enough budget, and that they're really suffering from turnovers and lack of support, which are the exact same arguments recruiters make. So you guys have something that, you can complain about. But that said, I do want to hone in for a minute on the competition for talent, because essentially what you think about when you think about an agency, I want you to think for a minute about like Sterling Cooper and Don Draper, right? Like they did really, really, really awesome creative, but at the same time, Don Draper would have been in big trouble if there was A/B testing, because instead of sitting there in those like all-night meetings trying to find that perfect concept, they could have just tested them and you could figure out really quickly if it sucked, right? So that model of needing the creative and the quality, the nice thing is that's becoming really iterative, and you don't need to come up with a full campaign to see if something's working, right? And so a lot of companies are realizing that, hey, you know what? It doesn't need to be a prettier way of saying our people are our greatest asset with nicer stock photos. We can see what works on the fly. And I think that's really cool. But at the end of the day, what your traditional marketing and ad agencies do is they create competitive differentiation. When I say Budweiser, you probably think of horses, right? It's basically another crappy light domestic beer. But it's the horses that make that differentiation. So in as much as that's kind of the point of a large part of agencies' purported value add, I like Mark Cuban, another Jew from Dallas, so shout out. But, he said if you're looking for the next big thing and you're looking where everyone else is, you're looking in the wrong place, right? And I kind of agree with that. Zig when everyone else zags is a nice way to say that. The only issue is that even within recruitment advertising, I'm not going to mention any specific names here, but, you can kind of just see how this breaks down. Everyone's essentially spending that 22% of their budget with the same 6 companies. That's, something that's essentially unavoidable. So what you're getting is consolidation, and it's been one that's gone on for quite some time, of what should be a really vibrant and segmented market into these kind of giant conglomerates. One thing I also do want to point out, in addition to the fact that you can't really create competitive differentiation when everyone's shopping at the exact same store with the exact same colors, it's a very, very hard ask. So, essentially you are getting shared expertise and other people's campaigns largely. You're also getting to test pet projects to see what works, because there is an old saying in the advertising world, and that's what's hot now is what sells now, which is just a terrible way to approach recruiting, I think. So I do want to show that to say if you want to, zig when everyone else is zagging, you should zag right away from these. Obviously, there are some niche players, but within these, each of them does do recruiting and recruitment marketing and are all actively increasing the business. So in addition to this, one thing I do want to point out as well that I wasn't aware of until I started digging in this webinar is that in addition to this shared spend, as we saw earlier, lots going to like external consulting and kind of strategic benchmarking best practices and that sort of thing. The companies that are doing that, which are largely professional services firms, which I'm sure that you can guess, are also among the largest buyers of online media in the world, and each of them have in-house dedicated ad agencies. So on the one hand, I have more or less 6 agencies, differently branded subsidiaries, telling me how I should market their recruiting product like the exact rest of their clients or whatever their strategy happens to be, right? And then I'm getting a report from them at the end of a quarter telling me how I did with absolutely no context and no way to double-check that, right? On the other hand, if I want to go the strategic route and say, what should I be looking at? What questions should I be asking? I get a professional services firm, and guess what their recommendation is? Very much largely the same as going to one of these when you go at the end of the day, and that is buy ads with us. Because you know how you make money in online advertising? It's the exact same theory as the scam and office space. Essentially, you make pennies off of every transaction and hope nobody notices. And for a large part, given $11.4 billion, nobody seems to. So there's that. Okay, so I do want to talk a little bit about the ad agency industry and why I think that recruiting and best practices are moving largely away from it, and it's a difference of philosophy too. So a couple of different things. The first that I want to point out is that, agencies are actually having more trouble hiring qualified staff than ever before. That is, we've established, as their top concern. When you spend money as an agency fee, for the most part, you have no choice over who's on your account. You are paying for every hour, and unfortunately, a lot of those hours are being worked by somebody who just graduated with a, communications degree 6 months ago, because that is your first step in the exciting world of marketing and advertising. As a general rule, is to come work at an agency, and you are generally parked on an account, generally a bad one, which means you're probably focused on recruiting. Problem is that those people are getting harder as this market becomes much more lucrative. In fact, one of my clients is one of those major ad agencies that we talked about, and my engagement with them involves writing their job descriptions. So they cannot hire, they cannot do their own recruitment marketing. I guess it's like the same reason HR technology companies generally tend to have the worst in-house HR. It's a case of cobbler's children, but in this case, I can safely assert that studies bear out that this is not a core competency they themselves have. So my question is, if you are going out and relying on them to obtain talent, have you looked at their career site? Have you seen the types of positions they're hiring? Have you seen the backgrounds of the people they're hiring for? Have you done any due diligence on whether or not they eat their own dog food, to use software parlance? And in almost all cases, the answer to that question is a resounding no. I would highly invite you to go take a look at the amazing employer branding for most of these companies, which is to say it's the worst candidate experience that you could have without using the Taleo application. So all that is to say, because agencies are struggling with staffing at all levels, they have a turnover rate that's about equivalent to fast food, at least, in the consumer marketing and digital advertising space, right? So you're looking at a turnover rate of somewhere between 35 and 40% a year, which is huge in a professional services organization. So you have about like 6 or 7 people working on an account during, a single retainer often. Little continuity, and a lot of people who are fighting internal politics to hit quotas, look good, and selling you stuff you might not need. I don't know if anyone remembers Pinterest for recruiting, but that was created by an agency with a large amount of money and purchasing power. Pinterest. Was that the most asinine thing ever? Yes, but this is kind of what happens when you take it out of house. Is you become a guinea pig for a centralized experiment to see what works and what doesn't. So companies are wising up to this, much like, we're saying, why are we paying 30%, 25% to an external recruiter to do something that we could bring in-house and do much more cheaply, right? And that largely is why we're seeing a rise, as statistics bear out, of sourcers and emphasis on a dedicated executive search function in-house largely, and almost unilaterally this works to, replace the spend that we've traditionally put on external recruiting agencies. So companies are doing the exact same thing when it comes to their marketing agencies. And so I would say if you're looking, to marketing as an antecedent, consider that these headlines have all come out in the last 6 months. Pepsi is taking its social media brand work. I believe it was with Porter Novelli. They're taking that in-house. Sprint, own in-house advertising agency. Prudential, Procter & Gamble, reviewing all agency contracts. Intel no longer actually has an agency of record. It's all done in-house. And then this actually happened yesterday. Verizon opened a giant in-house agency and then took the guy who ran the creative for Apple's agency of record. I want to say that it was Publicis or Publicis. They're French. I have a hard time with that. But, so you have somebody who's very happy in the agency world moving in-house to run the show. This is something that I think that we really need to start considering might be trickling down into this function, which is to say there's no need to outsource what can be done more cheaply and more effectively with employees who are able to actually credibly give the voice of an employee and talk about, what it's like to work at your company, primarily because they do, right? So all that is to say, agencies do awesome work. And don't get me wrong, they are invaluable partners when it comes to things like setting up strategy, making sure that you're looking at the right things, and you're considering sort of how to, start off spending and programmatic ad buying. But at some point in time, you're going to have that hard, heart-to-heart and say, look, is this working out? Am I getting money back for what I'm paying? And so, there are kind of some things that you can do to just kind of gut check and say, hey, am I getting my money's worth or am I being hoodwinked here? And the answer may surprise you, but it's pretty simple. Sign number one is that they're just not into you, and it's simple. There's an entire function called Generally Account Services whose entire job is to make sure that you, and I know as a recruiter this is a weird thing, the customer are happy. If you have to wait on, let's say a weekly or biweekly phone call, if there is a lag time and you're getting your communications returned, if you can't get answers when you need them or communicate with an agency in real time, that is a significant process gap and one that shows that, in fact, you, the client, are not being put first. Because if you can't reach them as needed to work through what you're going through, ladies and gentlemen, that is why you pay them a retainer. No attorney is going to, wait 2 weeks to return your call from prison after, you put down the money on their retainer. So you should also not expect that. So that's a huge warning sign, something that happens all the time. Sign number two, they're hiding something. This is what I really want to drill in on. So I'm not bashing LinkedIn in any way here, much to the contrary. But if anyone is familiar, by the way, with those best companies to advertise on LinkedIn reports, that's being drawn by how much money people spend on LinkedIn. When you get to own both the marketing buy as well as the reporting, as well as the distribution, as well as the technology, as long as you're vertically integrated, as agencies essentially are, you're getting a secondhand story that is spinning data that you don't know where it's coming from. You have no ability to validate. And the sad fact of capitalism is the end of that story, spoiler alert, is that it's working, spend more money. You need to be able to have full visibility in real time all the time to all of your analytics, right? Sign number three, they're using you for your money, nickel and diming. If you're having to continually pay for, one-offs like, oh, yeah, we'll charge you this amount to write a landing page. If you're saying, yeah, we'll gladly run this campaign as part of your job distribution, but we're going to need a little bit more billable hours to do so, say forget it. At the end of the day, it's about the end, not the means. And if they're not going to help you get there without charging you, they don't care about, your long-term success. Again, they're selling for what sells, not for what works. Which is a big problem. Not that you would have any idea. Four, they make money off of technology and aren't vendor agnostic. Again, this is a separation of powers here. It's church and state, more or less. Your technology stack absolutely needs to be separate from your agency spend. A lot of agencies are trying to hybridize product and services ever since, and I'm not bringing up any specific agencies here, but the first time this happened was about 12 years ago. Monster spun off TMP. You continually see this happen again and again, this bifurcation of product and services. For some reason, our industry is going back around, but the problem, again, is that if you don't own one of those two, then essentially you are giving them a blank check to be able to develop all of your analytics and own your data on both their proprietary, HR systems as well as their media networks and things like that. So you want to own your intellectual property, and you want to own the ability to optimize your spend. Make sure that you're not doing it for the sake of a product or to give a company data that then they can resell, because guess what? Market research is how a lot of money is made there. Number 5, things done change. We're different people. Look, 75% of all advertising budget right now goes to online. Compare that to just 2011, that number was sitting right around 40%. Unlike media buys on TV, broadcast, or traditional, you don't need to have connections to make a placement. You don't need to be able to call up a network and be able to speak to their media buyers and, package that. That's a great use of an agency. But, when it comes to being able to do things like bid on AdWords, when it comes to being able to target things like social advertising, when it comes to able to deliver retargeting and perform, those are now things that you can do in-house just as effectively as them and without having to pay the extra margin to get that inventory. I'm not saying that's an easy thing to do, but it's just like, YouTube. You no longer have to be a studio to make a film. You no longer necessarily have to outsource media buying, particularly if your emphasis is online. But, their career sites sure are pretty. So there are, like I said, good agencies, and here's how you know your agency is a good one. I know I'm running short on time. So like I said, reporting happens in real time, not on their time. So when you ask for something, you get it, and it's hopefully self-service. They don't focus on stuff like Twitter impressions or reach or other things like that. In fact, I fired an agency once when their reporting package turned out to be a screenshot of the Sprout Social dashboard, something that I also have, by the way. Thank you for that, $8,000 a month. So instead, they're focusing on how much bottom line impacts that they're delivering and helping you essentially make a business case for them. Again, you'd always access your data. It's yours. They should not be able to touch it. You should be able to tell your own story rather than have them, come up with both the beginning, median, and end, which the end is, again, always spend more. It's working. They nurture and develop leads through targeting and segmenting. That is to say, they aren't awesome necessarily, as agencies traditionally are, at opening the floodgates, but they're really good at getting, the right people interested at the right time all the time. If they can do that, then they're really adding value. And rather than trying what's best, cool tools, creative campaigns, they really are constantly iterating. They don't know the answer because something different is going to probably work for every company and every function. Instead, they are very transparent, constantly test, optimize, and work with you as a strategic partner to get the best possible results rather than simply handing you results and saying, here, look, we did good. So here's the good side of breaking up, though. You get to go shopping. Right? So if you're currently working with an agency, you're relying on their technology and you are relying on them to essentially make all of your decisions, then maybe it's time to reconsider, where you're putting that spend. So if you want a street show, Phil, here's a shopping list for buying recruitment marketing technology. And that's that the product goes beyond the application, and rather than, just generates leads, is actually systematically developing and scoring candidates so that, you're able to deliver differentiated messages from them, not just when they come into the funnel, but throughout the entire hiring process and beyond. You need to be able to have dashboarding and reporting capabilities that come from different sources of data and know exactly when those are. You should be able to slice and dice, and you should be able to clearly visualize that story in a way that any idiot or CFO can understand. Third, they are partners. They are there for you, and they want to make you look good, not make themselves look good to climb up another rung in an agency and move from account executive to senior account executive. You will know that difference when you see it, but there's nothing like a good partner if they're looking out for you. And also, you know what you're paying for. This is really important. If you're handed an invoice, you should know exactly what every single line item on it is and how much is being spent. If they have to take the time to explain to you where their various itemizations are coming from. If everything's lumped together and they kind of dance around, where that allocation went, if you're paying primarily on a retainer model, then guess what? You're in big trouble because you are being hoodwinked, and your CFO, it's not a good business case to make to say, we paid him this money and these are the results, maybe. And then, again, the product UI UX is better than something that was developed in 1988 and is being used basically as a loss leader to try to own your data and sell services. Like, your recruitment marketing platform should not be an afterthought, which unfortunately it is when you're a giant services organization trying to always get customers in the funnel. All right? And that's why the products look great. So with that, I know I'm a little over time, but thank you very much to my friends at Smashfly, and make sure to check them out for a good example of what a recruitment marketing platform can do for you. And again, don't necessarily divorce your agency, but just make sure you give them some tough love.
All right. Matt, thank you so much for joining us today. Really enjoyed that.
Thank you.
To everybody who joined our call today, thank you so much for being here. As I said before, we'll be sending out a recording and slides for your review a little later today, so keep your eye out for that. And as Matt said, if you want to learn more about Smashfly's total recruitment marketing platform, you can check us out at smashfly.com. And we've got a great blog at blog.smashfly.com. It has a lot of resources for, trying to find the right solution for your recruitment marketing needs, great examples of awesome employer branding, and just regular updates on the latest trends in recruitment marketing. So thanks again for joining us, everybody, and have a wonderful rest of your afternoon.